What if I told you that a man with a PhD in theoretical physics worked a normal job for exactly 5 years, saved 75% of every paycheck, and then never had to work again at the age of 33? No lottery ticket, no stock tip, no inheritance, just math and a complete rewiring of what a good life is supposed to look like. His name is Jacob Lund Fisker, and the book he wrote afterward isn't really a personal finance book. There are barely any budgeting spreadsheets in it. It's something stranger and more radical. A philosophy book that asks why you're working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 40 years, when you're already twice as productive as your grandparents were doing the same job. It asks why you send your kids away to daycare the moment they're born. It asks why a bigger house with unused rooms is considered more successful than a smaller house you actually use. This is early retirement extreme. And by the end of this video, you'll understand the exact formula that lets some people retire in 5 years while others need 45, and why the difference has almost nothing to do with how much money you make. Fisker opens with Plato's cave. You know the story. Prisoners chained since childhood, facing a wall, watching shadows cast by a fire behind them. They think the shadows are reality. One prisoner escapes, sees the actual world outside, and comes back to free the others. Most don't believe him. Some get angry at him. Nobody wants to admit they've spent their whole life staring at shadows. Fisker's point is blunt. Most of us are wage slaves, and our chains aren't iron anymore. They're mental. A wage slave isn't just someone who's economically dependent on a paycheck. It's someone who can't even imagine an alternative. And the shadows in our modern cave are things like the granite countertop, the leased SUV, the 5-bedroom house with 3 empty bedrooms. We've been trained to read status off of what people own, not who they are or what they can actually do. Here's the part that stings. Society hands you a deal. Get a student loan, get a degree, get a mortgage, build a life on a deck of credit cards. Sign here. And once you sign, it becomes very hard to imagine life without all of it. The cable package, the car payment, the gym membership you use twice a month. You spend your most productive years exchanging time for stuff, and the stuff, once you total it up, is often worth less than what you paid to earn it. Fisker asks you to actually do that math. Add up everything you've earned in your life, subtract your savings, and look at what's left. That pile of stuff in your closet, was it really a good trade for your irreplaceable hours? The alternative he proposes isn't austerity. It's this: whatever the average consumer spends on wants, save that instead. Do that consistently, and financial independence isn't a 40-year project. It could be a 5-year one. Fisker also draws a sharper distinction most personal finance books skip entirely: the difference between education and training. Training is what you know how to do. Education is who you become as a person while learning it. A college degree, he argues, is mostly training dressed up as education. It teaches you to follow instructions, hit deadlines, and wait for someone smarter to hand you the answer, which happens to be exactly the skill set employers want in a salaried workforce. Real education, the kind that actually builds a person capable of independent thought, tends to happen despite formal schooling, not because of it. To explain why most people stay chained to their jobs, Fisker builds a simple framework for economic personality types based on 2 variables: how tightly you're coupled to a paycheck and whether your work is linear or not. The salaryman is the most common type. He trades hours for a fixed wage. His entire cash flow is a straight line. Work, paycheck, spend it all, repeat. He has options, which brand of cereal, which of 3 financing plans on a car, but he doesn't create options. That illusion of choice inside a narrow range is, in Fisker's words, how control is exercised without anyone noticing they've lost their freedom. The working man is a freelancer or contractor. His income is irregular, so, smartly, he keeps an emergency fund or buffer to smooth things out. He's actually more resilient than the salaryman, even though his life looks riskier on paper because he's used to finding new income sources instead of panicking when one dries up. The businessman controls more than his own labor. He directs other people's money and other people's time to generate profit. He's not selling hours, he's building systems. But he trades job security for a different risk. The business itself can fail, and if he's leveraged with debt, that failure can be sudden and total. Fisker is careful to note that almost nobody is purely one type. Most of us are a blend, leaning toward one corner of the map. And the map isn't fixed. A salaryman can start nudging himself toward independence just by learning to build things instead of buying them. A businessman can shrink his ambitions from leverage everything to serve a handful of people extremely well and suddenly find the stress evaporating along with the risk. The categories aren't a life sentence. They're a diagnosis and a starting point. And then there's the type Fisker actually wants you to become, the Renaissance man. This is the heart of the book. The Renaissance man isn't a specialist who buys his way out of every problem he can't personally solve. He's the opposite of the modern, pick one skill and monetize it. Advice you hear everywhere. He can cook a real meal from raw ingredients instead of a microwave box. He can fix his bike, patch drywall, do his own taxes, understand his own investments. He's socially skilled enough to trade favors and knowledge instead of always reaching for his wallet. Physically, he can keep up with people half his age because his body isn't a couch-shaped consequence of decades of disuse. Why does this matter for early retirement? Because every skill you actually own is a piece of the marketplace you no longer have to rent. If you can cut your own hair, mend your own clothes, cook from scratch, fix your own car, and grow some of your own food, your cost of living doesn't just drop. It collapses. And when your cost of living collapses, the amount of capital required to be financially free collapses right along with it. You don't need $2 million to be free if your actual needs are a fraction of what the average consumer thinks they need. Fisker draws a direct line here to the original Renaissance humanists and the polymaths of the Enlightenment. People who were expected to be competent across many domains, not just one narrow lane. Modern specialization, he argues, makes you efficient at your job and helpless everywhere else. And helplessness is expensive. Every skill you outsource to the market is a permanent subscription fee on your life. So how do you actually structure a life around this? Fisker uses an analogy, a university. A university has dozens of departments, physics, history, biology, each one strong on its own, loosely connected to the others. If the physics department has a bad semester, the history department doesn't collapse. That's resilience through loose coupling. Compare that to the average consumer's life, which looks like a tight loop. Drive to your job, exchange time for money, drive to the store, exchange money for stuff, drive home, repeat. Sever the job, the one link holding the whole loop together, and everything else falls apart with it. Fisker's fix is to build your life in independent, self-supporting modules, the way a university has departments. Each hobby, skill, or side pursuit should ideally be able to stand on its own, costing you little or nothing, teaching you something, and ideally, eventually, generating some value or income, even if that wasn't the original point. He tells his own story. He got into computers as a money-draining hobby, switched to just learning the operating system for free instead of buying new hardware, and ended up becoming the informal system administrator at his workplace, simply because he knew the most. That eventually turned into freelance copy editing work using skills he picked up formatting scientific papers. None of it was planned as a career. It all grew sideways, module by module, each one loosely connected to the next. The rule of thumb: if a hobby is bleeding you money every month with no end in sight, it's not a module, it's a leak. Real modules are either free, or they pay for themselves, or eventually they pay you. Now for the part that made this book famous in the personal finance world, the savings rate formula. Forget your salary for a second. What actually determines how many years you need to work isn't how much you earn. It's the ratio between what you save and what you spend. Fisker lays out a brutally simple relationship. If you save 10% of your income, you need roughly 9 years of work to fund 1 year of not working. Meaning, without investment growth, something like 40+ years of working life to retire in the traditional sense. Save 20%, and that ratio drops to 4 years of work per year of freedom. Save 50%, and it's 1-to-1. A year of work funds a year of freedom. And at a 75% savings rate, spending only a quarter of your income, you can accumulate enough to retire in around 5 years. Why does the curve bend so sharply? Because your savings rate is doing double duty. Every dollar you don't spend does two things at once. It shrinks the size of the pile you need to accumulate, and it grows that pile faster because you're feeding more into it. Fisker even works out the compound interest version of this with actual formulas, showing that a portfolio sized at 25 times your annual expenses, invested conservatively, can sustain withdrawals indefinitely, which is close to what's now popularly known as the 4% rule. Double your savings before you start withdrawing, and you don't just double how long the money lasts. You can add decades. The traditional financial advice of saving 15% a year and retiring at 65, Fisker shows that at realistic return rates, that path can take well over 30 years and closer to 45 years if returns are more modest. Meanwhile, someone saving 75% is finished in 5. Same economy, same market. The only variable that matters is the gap between what comes in and what goes out. And Fisker's entire book is essentially a manual for widening that gap without feeling deprived. The back half of the book gets tactical, walking through nearly every category of daily spending and asking, does this actually need to cost what it costs? On possessions, Fisker flips the modern instinct completely. Stuff isn't an asset. It's a liability with a monthly bill attached. Money to buy it, space to store it, time to maintain it, and a strange gravitational pull toward buying more stuff to go with it. He points out that his entire net worth in physical possessions, including his home, adds up to less than 10% of what he actually owns. Everything else works quietly for him in investments. His rule: before buying something, ask if you could borrow it, make it, fix an old one, or simply live without it. On shelter, he questions the assumption that bigger is better, arguing that a smaller, efficient space, chosen for function rather than status, dramatically cuts your largest expense category before you've made a single frugal sacrifice. On health, Fisker takes a swipe at two popular archetypes: the couch potato, sedentary and dependent on medication to patch the damage, and the chronic runner, who logs endless miles but stays soft because low-intensity cardio barely touches muscle or real functional strength. His answer is what he calls functional fitness, training movements that mirror real life. Squatting like you're picking up a child, pulling like you're hauling a rope, lifting like you're stacking sacks. He notes that his 80-year-old grandmother, who grew up doing physical farm work her whole life, was until recently stronger than his mother, who wasn't, who in turn is stronger than his wife, who sits at a desk all day. Proof, he argues, that strength isn't about age. It's about decades of use or disuse. On transportation, walking and cycling aren't presented as sacrifices but as free upgrades. They're transportation and exercise bundled into a single activity at zero marginal cost, while a car quietly drains money through payments, insurance, fuel, and depreciation the entire time it sits parked in your driveway. And on food, clothing, and services, cell phone plans, cable, insurance, the pattern repeats. Question the default, learn the skill behind the service, and reclaim that slice of your paycheck. Fisker closes the book with his own story. After finishing his PhD in physics, he worked as a research associate for 5 years, banking 75% of what he earned. Then he stopped. Today, he describes his job as being his own cook, his own mechanic, his own accountant, his own financial advisor, with about 20 different diversified streams of investment income, quietly refilling his accounts every month, requiring maybe a few hours of his attention. He makes one observation that lands harder than anything else in the book. The people who call his life risky are usually the same people relying on a single employer as their sole source of food and shelter. If markets crash badly enough to threaten his portfolio, he notes, unemployment would likely be so widespread that the salaried safe path wouldn't look so safe either. Financial independence, in his view, isn't reckless. It's actually the more resilient position, built the same way nature builds resilient systems, through diversity, redundancy, and loose coupling instead of a single point of failure. The book ends less like a finance manual and more like an invitation. Fisker never gives you a rigid step-by-step plan because he didn't follow one himself. He built his understanding piece by piece, curiosity by curiosity, and only afterward realized it added up to a coherent philosophy. Early retirement extreme isn't really asking you to be frugal. It's asking you to stop outsourcing your entire life to the marketplace. Rebuild your own competence, close the gap between what you earn and what you need, and walk out of the cave. That's Early Retirement Extreme by Jacob Lund Fisker. If this reframed the way you think about money, work, and time, hit subscribe for more deep dives like this one. And let me know in the comments. Could you actually live on 25% of your income?